I think we should gradually begin to move away from a situation where the court sits down to reject votes that have been validly allowed by INEC, because the provision of Section 63 of the Electoral Act clearly empowers INEC to count ballot papers or reject ballot papers. And so, if INEC, after conduct of election, admits ballot papers used and votes counted, vote validly counted, it is exceptional grounds or circumstances that the court would go ahead to say, okay, yes, these votes allotted were either overvoted or that this is not the actual figure in that case, or that the votes were invalid votes that were added to the votes of a candidate. But the idea of the court just saying that, okay, yes, you nullify election on in three local government and close your eyes to the valid votes in those local governments, even if you hold that there were irregularities, asking them to go redo it in most cases would mean to now ask them to go and if there's rigging or you say there's irregularity, you're asking them to go and repeat irregularities. So, and you see these inconsistencies in some cases, because in some cases, like in the case of Oshomah, where the court identified that they were overvoting, what the court simply did is to cancel outrightly all the votes from those areas where they were overvoting. In the same vein, when a court identifies that there were issues with number of votes counted and allotted, in that case, what the court should do is, if votes were subtracted, for the court to add them. We saw it happen in Oshomah's case, some years ago. Or you remove the vote if the votes are invalid votes. But the situation where you just say evidence were not considered by the tribunal, and that so, to that extent, go and redo election in 3 local governments on the ground, because the appellant complained that the vote he's called were not added to his vote. But the tribunals also rejected those votes that he said he's called, and now asked parties to go and redo the process.
All right, and then there's also the controversial issue, well, whether you agree that whether that controversy has now been rested regarding the place of IREV. The court also, spoke on that issue, saying it was a viewing portal, so to speak, and not a vote collation system.
That is where I'm coming to. That I wanted you to ask the question, and if you didn't ask, I would have brought it in. Because that's where I would fault the court. The Supreme Court holding that IREV was a viewing portal does not mean that if results are collated using results from IREV, that it validates the results. No, that's not the position of the Supreme Court, with all due respect to the court. If you go to INEC rule regulation number 93, it is expressly stated there, and the Court of Appeals, sitting as a court of first instance in the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal, quoted copiously that provision also, that when in collecting results, the INEC shall resort to the result sheets from the lower rung of the collation center. In the absence of a result sheet, INEC shall use the result from the IREV. In the absence of the result sheet and result from IREV, INEC shall use the result sheet handed over to the security agents at the poll. So you have 3 methods of INEC collating results. One is the hard copies of the result sheet. In the absence of the hard copies of the result sheet, INEC can resort to the result as posted on the IREV. So what the petitioners were disputing in the presidential election petition was that the failure to use IREV was fatal to the result, that what the INEC did was just usage of the manual result sheet and they did not use IREV. it was on that ground that the Supreme Court held that INEC is empowered by their own rule to use The Supreme Court did not expressly state that result cannot be collated using iron. Mind you, if you read the judgment of the Supreme Court in the case of Oshomah, the Supreme Court explicitly held that IREV, the failure in the event that it is when the manual collation fails that the INEC can resort to IREV. So where INEC, for example, collate results using IREV in the absence of the manual results by their Rule 93, the court has no power to invalidate those results so collated. So that's why I think it is high time the court should take a step back and ensure that they do not interfere unduly in the conduct of election when the procedures laid down by the umpire have been followed. That was what the Supreme Court also did in the Presidential Election Tribunal when they refused to interfere in the conduct. What these tribunals are doing is an interference in the conduct of the election and not interpretation of the rules. They are interfering. Election is a democratic election is a rule for the majority and not by the court. A situation where the majority have taken a step and voted, and then the court now come using such flimsy excuses to say that, oh, look, because you use IREV to collate. And so on that ground, those local governments where results were collated using IREV, you validate those local government and ask them to go and redo it. That is not the law. With all due respect, that is not the law. You can read Regulation 93 of INEC guidelines. And the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal in the Presidential Election Tribunal and the Supreme Court relied also on that regulation. That was why they did not invalidate the election, because the rule says the first line shall be collation manually. Right. It is when you don't have the result sheet manually that you resort to IREV. So if it is proved that those result sheets were not available manually as at the time of collation, there was nothing wrong in using IREV to collate those results.